At Sennen, Brenda began what became a lifelong love of the stage. Following on from her outing on stage with the WI, she and John, with others, were founder members of the Sennen Drama Group in November 1956, which met regularly in the Little Church Hall. Both Brenda and John were on the group's committee and executive committee, which met up in members' houses, and the group soon acquired a large membership. They held regular play readings and produced 1- and 3-act plays, and then decided to put on a pantomime. They opened it up to the members to propose a story and plot, and Brenda's The Golden Goose was accepted. So she began to write the scripts. John was named as stage manager and props, and Brenda as scenery painter, but she soon widened her scope. The pantos became an annual event, and many local families were involved in some way, most of them petrified at their first attempt at treading the boards. Brenda says she and John were also involved in the inauguration of the Minack Theatre Society around the same time. There was a gaggle of Jackson lads whose family ran the store up over Hill, opposite Zachy Nicholas's garage. One of them, Bobby, had a joke to say on stage, which he thought so funny, whilst he was at the same time so nervous, it caused him to stammer and stutter wildly. I live in a rude hut, he had to say. Oh yes, and why is it called a rude hut? Was the feed line. Well, you should, hysterical giggles, you should see, more hysteria. You should see the writing on the walls, he finally spluttered out. Mike Sagar Fenton revived another memory of Bobby for me. I remember well the Sennen postman with the stutter. He had a not very funny line. I had a girl once, she was 36, 24, 36, but that was just the shape of her head. It came out as, I had a girl once, and she was 24 and 36, and then came out all of a rush. But that was just the shape of her head, mind. No one caught the joke, of course, but for the cast it was the highlight of every show. Brenda's involvement with the pantomimes was total. As soon as one finished, she'd begin researching the next. She collected jokes from newspapers and joke books throughout the year and made use of local characters, incidents, and events. I still have some of the fabulous antique books of fairy stories she amassed, looking for a story she could adapt to suit Sennen and its folk. After the Golden Goose came Abu Hassan, Grizzly Beard, and the Shoes That Were Danced to Pieces, and the Rolling Stones of Pluinic, performed in 1964 with the Playgoers Theatre Group in Penzance. At the initial meeting, she would ask who would like to have a go, and always tried to include roles for everyone who wanted to participate. She arranged the publicity and the tours. They actually toured the local village and church halls with some of the pantos, carrying the flats, costumes and props with them, sometimes across muddy fields for one-night stands. There are records of pantos being taken to Pendine Sunday School, St Just British Legion, to St Buryan, Paul and Ludgvan Village Halls, to the Playgoers Theatre in Penzance, and even to the Cheshire Homes at Marazion. She was heavily involved in all of them. Generally, she wrote the scripts, made the costumes, did the makeup, produced, directed and acted. John made the props, built the flats, did the lighting and acted. Painting the scenery flats was a joyful communal affair, enriched by the pantomime stew, the stew pot bubbling away on an old primus in the hall, filled with everything contributed by everyone there, meat, veg, tinned stuff, whatever. Mike Sagar Fenton recalls, Brenda even danced, and I remember a song called You Bring Out the Savage in Me. Originally, this was a big, boastful tribal number, and in the middle she did a tribal-type dance with Vera. The tempo was quite fast and the dance quite demanding, so in rehearsal they found themselves completely out of breath, not to say knackered, when it came to the final chorus. You'll find out how wild I can be, for you bring out the savage in me. Instead of booming it out, they literally tottered through it, wheezing, which was, of course, so funny they kept it in for every performance. Some of Brenda's lifelong friendships were forged from her Andram involvement. Vera Round, also one of the Chuffs group, wife of Arnold, who lived at Marazion, did a wonderful parody of Joyce Grenfell and had a wicked sense of humour. She was known to me as Auntie V and came from Bolton, and was often heard to say, I could have been a film star if it wasn't for me face. Vera loved dancing, a pastime she pursued throughout her life, but her fall from grace was forgetting to wear her knickers one evening for one high-kicking performance. There was Doris Wernhardt, a British Drama League adjudicator, who, as an elocution teacher at West Cornwall Girls' School in Penzance, also took me for private speech lessons. Mike Sagar Fenton, who I first remember as a young lad playing the drums for the panto, also wrote songs and worked with Brenda as a guitarist later in life. And then there was the inimitable and incorrigible Donald Jarvis. Donald lived at Sennen with his mum, his auntie and his uncle in a large house on the edge of the Atlantic Crescent estate. He worked for British Airways at Land's End Airport and at Penzance Heliport at Eastern Green. He was an excellent cook and a brilliant raconteur, particularly in Cornish dialogue, although his accent, when you met him, was more languid, upper-class lovey, with his, "Darling, how divine to see you." He was so laid back he famously fell asleep on stage during one revue show they did together. One theatre group Brenda also often worked with in the late 50s and 60s was Madron Players. Leading lights Francis Monk, Vicar of Madron, and Mary Leahy, the dear of her, appeared in several plays and pantomimes, but Brenda also took the company through a couple of British Drama League festivals, reaching the semi-finals with The Mayor of Torrentall. This involved moving the entire company, costumes, props, makeup and scenery by coach to Leamington Spa for the event. Very exciting. Despite the 10-hour coach journey, I went along as props girl. Brenda remembers her association with the various local groups in Madron. My first contact with Madron Players was when the county drama advisor, John Trelease, asked me to produce The Smugglers of Sennen by Cornish bard Molly Bartlett. Also, she later recalled it as the first time she had sung Lamorna in public. Madron Players shared several members with Madron WI and Madron Young Farmers. And WI member Vida Pengelly, after some persuading from Brenda, proved a fine actress, as did the young Mary Leahy, heavily pregnant with Treve, who many years later was to build Brenda's house at New Mill. One very enthusiastic member of both the WI and Madron players was Lady of the Manor, Wilmay Le Grice of Treve, for whom the older residents of the village still tugged their forelock. Says Brenda, I recall lovely fêtes at Treve Manor, donkey rides on the front lawn, wild flower competitions, Wilmay's gooseberry tarts in the kitchen, baby shows upstairs. I was given free rein of the manor, looking for props and furniture for many of the plays and shows. Upstairs in the attic, covered in dust and cobwebs, were priceless pieces of antique furniture. We borrowed some 19th century French bedroom chairs for the mayor of Torontal, and they were heaved into the back of Peter Lay's lorry, which broke down 5 times on the way back from Leamington Spa. We were given the freedom of the city of Leamington Spa, which basically meant we could borrow a library book or play tennis, but we didn't have time to do a thing other than the play competition. I was so scared we'd win and have to go on to Belfast for the Great Britain British Drama League finals. The whole of Madron, it seemed, had raised cash and looked after children to enable us to go to the semis. As it was, we came just 1 point behind the winners, so honour was satisfied. The children of Madron's Daniel School, named for the same benefactor as Daniel Place in Penzance, interestingly, were very lucky in their teacher, Francis Monk, but they couldn't believe their eyes when they saw Sir and the Mrs. Le Grice in the feast concert, dressed in exotic Arabian costumes. Wilmay's included baggy translucent harem pants and wolfing down a whole banana each during a performance of the comedy play Carpet Slippers. Other productions got to the quarter-finals in Truro City Hall, and here Doris Wernhard, J.P., reigned as one of the chief adjudicators. She was a remarkable woman, tall, with a chest like a ship in full sail, and a bird's nest of fiery henna-red hair perched wispily atop slate-grey sides. She lived with her husband Stephen, a German Jew, in a green-painted clapboard bungalow in Morne Smith. Brenda had tried to interest me, as do so many eager mothers, in the piano lessons in Sennen, a dead loss, and the ballet lessons at Miss O'Mingay's dancing school in Penrose Terrace in Penzance, another non-starter. When Brenda mentioned this to her friend Doris, she suggested I undertake speech lessons with her at her room in West Cornwall Girls' School in Penzance, where she was then teaching elocution. Not to get rid of my Cornish accent, although that was one of the end results, but because I gabbled so fast, it was difficult to make out what I was saying. I loved it and passed all my Lambda speech medals through to gold, despite being too sibilant. So Doris did some good. Amongst other things, we ran the gamut of speech exercises from round and round the rugged rock the ragged rascal ran, to which witch had the wen on her hand when we met them, and you asked them whether we would have fine weather, delivered in received pronunciation with aspirated H's, a style now mostly outmoded. Doris often said to me, "You'll never forget this, Susan. Whenever you have to stand up in public and give a speech or attend an interview or act on the stage, you'll remember what you learned here today." And she was right. A little hovering Doris bubble appears in my mind on every such occasion. When one of my speech exams loomed, I and one or two other girls in the same plight would be invited to stay with Doris at her home in Morne Smith for a few days of intensive training. Sally Trelease was one, daughter of county drama advisor John Trelease, who was also working to restore the Cornish lugger Barnabas for the Cornish Maritime Trust, and featured in one of Brenda's TV shows for Westward. Doris was obsessed with Siamese cats. Not only did she have half a dozen living and breathing specimens, but every surface in every room in her house, tables, shelves, picture rails with shelves, cupboards, sideboards, was covered in ceramic or glass representations of them, including several of those giant-sized, coloured brandy glasses with secreted mice, with their attendant cats hanging on the edge, frozen in pursuit. In between speech training sessions, we picked hazelnuts from her trees, marvelled at the aviary with 80 noisy budgies in the garden, or went down to the creek below the house to paddle and laze. Mike Sagar Fenton tells a delicious story of Doris. Apparently she was appalled when some children in one class she was called upon to take kept using the F word in their general speech. So, "I can't fucking do it, miss," one would say. "Why must you do this?" she asked, mystified. "Why do you preface everything you say with this word fucking?" "Well, everyone does it nowadays, miss," was the general consensus. "Oh, I see," she replied, still mystified. She resolved to put this to the test. On her return home, she called out to her husband with her immaculate diction, "Hello, Stephen. I'm fucking home. I'm going to have a fucking cup of tea and a fucking sit down now. I'm fucking tired." Stephen looked up at her, horrified. "Don't you ever do that to me again," he growled. Brenda also did a few productions with the CRDF, the Cornwall Religious Drama Fellowship, in the 1950s, appearing in plays at the Minack Theatre with them, and also at the City Hall in Truro. I remember particularly Noah. Noah was played by a guy called Ted Miller, and Mrs. Noah was a sweet little lady called Mrs. Klesky. Others involved included Colin Stevenson and Vera Round. This is especially memorable for me, as Ted's daughter got the part of a lamb in Noah and I didn't. She had a congenital problem with her hand, and we were in the same room together at Tehiddy Hospital throughout my convalescence there. There was also the West Cornwall Theatre Company, and several of the leading characters from both these theatre groups went on to form the Playgoers Theatre Club in Penzance around 1960.